Hello, it's Neil Romanek, and welcome to episode 3 of Nothing is Written, which is a discussion about Lawrence of Arabia, the masterpiece by David Lean, which is going to be showing at the Prince Charles Cinema this month in London in a 70mm print, a new 70mm print, and I'll be going to see that probably next week and check it out, and I'll give you my full review of that particular print. But in any case, the last couple episodes, the first episode, I talked a bit about Lawrence of Arabia, why I was doing this in the first place, a bit about the history of my having seen that movie when I was first exposed to it. Then last episode, I talked a bit about the different versions of Lawrence that have appeared over the years, particularly the 1989 restoration, which allowed a whole new generation to rediscover that movie and fall in love with it. And I'm going to be talking about, in future episodes, I'm going to be talking about individual scenes, kind of a scene-by-scene basis. We can go through that movie. And what I'd like to do eventually, at the end of this, is just do a whole audio commentary of the entire movie. What I might do is I might start doing that just by scenes, scene by scene by scene. But I don't know, I'm kind of figuring this out as I go along. As it says in the title, it's called Nothing is Written, a Lawrence of Arabia notebook. And this is very much a notebook for me, and trying to get some thoughts down that I have about the movie. So before I get into those details, though, and the themes, cinematography, direction, writing, dialogue, costume, performance, motifs, planting and payoff, all that stuff, I thought I would just kind of ask myself, so what? Lawrence of Arabia, so what? What's the big deal? Why is this such an important movie? Why is it such an important movie to me? And why is it such an important movie to so many people? Why is it such an important movie to Steven Spielberg? Because as I have said before, if you don't have Lawrence of Arabia, you don't have Steven Spielberg. Steven Spielberg saw the movie when it first came out. It changed the way he thought about movies and inspired him to become a director. And you can see in his earlier movies, especially that, Jaws and Close Encounters, that clarity of direction and that use of the frame, the kind of careful use of the frame. You can see a lot of inspiration that he got from David Lean. That kind of almost excitement about how to use a widescreen frame and use it in depth, and to cut, using that whole frame. A very good director, that young Steven Spielberg. But so I asked myself, Lawrence of Arabia, so what? What's the big deal? Is it just another big epic movie with a lot of people, dying, and swords and guns and trains and war and all that stuff? One of the things that really strikes me about it is and there's so many things I love about that movie, but if I was to really sort of say what's the big deal, is how many different levels it operates on. How it is, of course, and that's what strikes people straight away. It is a large scale, expansive, epic. I hate to use that word epic. It's not an epic. An epic is literally something very different. But it is a story about big events, large numbers of people, a story that affects large numbers of people. I actually went through and I had... one day I sat down and I said, what makes an epic? And I came up with these 10 points of what actually makes an epic. And I'll have to dig those out, and I'll talk about this. But it does have those, what we normally think is epic themes. It's a historical event that literally did affect millions of people. So it's portraying something that has a mythic resonance in our own personal history, our real history. It has a large cast. It has sweeping music. It's got, lots of money was spent on it. It's an impressive undertaking. Just the making of that movie itself is a really impressive undertaking. But beneath it all, what amazes me is the intimacy of that movie and the characters and the internal emotion that's expressed. And that is something very unusual that you rarely ever see in any movie. But you do see it in the David Lean, Robert Bolt collaborations. Actually, you see it in most of David Lean's movies, but particularly in Lawrence, where it appears to be this big, large-scale external adventure movie, and it is. But what it really is, the most important part of it, is this intimate story about a guy who is, has an empty hole inside of him the size of the world to a certain extent. That's one way you can look at what that movie's about. And we're able to really sit with him and get intimate with him and know things about him that nobody else knows. In the whole movie, we're able to see Lawrence as intimately and as thoroughly as anybody else around him, and still we don't know him fully. And I think that is one of the remarkable things about that movie, and puts it on, in the same vein as Tolstoy or, one of these, a great novelist who would be able to show you the large, great events of history, but how they're really actually built of these personal moments, these personal pains and anxieties and struggles. And I'd never really seen a movie do that before, with that very interior, very existential look at a character, but at the same time be able to do something that really is a jolly good story that has real visceral emotional impact, that takes you on a great adventure, but yet still has these deeper levels. And it does do all those things. It is funny. It is frightening. It is a intimate character study on the level of an Ingmar Bergman movie. It is beautiful spectacle and travelogue. It also reveals something awful in the environment that is something you might see in Werner Herzog. There's so many angles to it, and it becomes Shakespearean in that way too. When you read Shakespeare, you got great story with mythical resonance. You also have very strange, peculiar autobiographical detail of things that really, you have a sense, this, parts of Hamlet, you're like, this doesn't make sense to anybody except the writer. He's there, or Lear, this is just him writing for himself. And you have these amazing character parts, in Shakespeare that are just great roles to play. What a wonderful, pleasure as an actor to be able to play those roles. And yet, on the other hand, they are just intimate character studies that really cast the audience aside entirely. And sometimes they just become very, some of the soliloquies are just the writer trying to figure something out, casting the character aside entirely, not even caring about the character. So these extremes of being able to put these extremes together into one perfect package is, for me, a mark of great art. And Lawrence of Arabia does that. And a lot of the great artists do that. Van Gogh did that, or Van Gogh. I guess it depends on what part of the world you're from, how you pronounce his name, where there's this tremendous passion, this great creativity, and this sense of that it looks like he's just throwing it out on the canvas. He's just winging it. And of course, behind that is this great control, careful discipline, tremendous work ethic. And you get these polarities, these two things going on at once to create a synthesis and something very wonderful in the middle. So that is one of the things that I admire most about Lawrence of Arabia, that being able to tie together and bring together these extremes of theatricality and realism, epic scope and intimate detail, giant picturesque travelogue pictures of wonderful locations, versus the tiny details that you would never think to notice. The music, beautiful, great, romantic, sweeping music, and also some very strange, peculiar things going on with the music at the same time at certain points. So it's everything you can think of put into one movie, but done so it's not just cacophony or a crazy soup or a mush of stuff together. Instead, it creates harmony and resonance. So that's, for me, that's the big deal. When I ask, what's the big deal about Lawrence of Arabia? Well, that's part of the big deal, is the way it's able to do so many things so well. And as I've said before, I think in the first episode, the fact that I keep coming back to it and studying it and thinking about it and watching it, and new things are always occurring to me, or I notice something, or like, oh, wow, he actually hadn't realized he said that before, and that actually resonates with what somebody else said in the beginning, or I'll see a motif or a payoff of a line or a proper theme that pops up that I hadn't seen before. So there's always something new. When I come to it again, I'm always seeing something new. And I love, again, as I've said, that movie is smarter than me. That Lawrence of Arabia will always be one step ahead of me, and as a viewer and as a student of film. So that's all from me right now. If you want to get a hold of me, please do so at nramanic@au-works.com. And you can reach me on social media too. On Twitter, I'm at Rabbit and Crow. And I hope to hear from you. Thanks a lot. Bye.